my name is Sofia Ehrich, and I'm an art historian, academic researcher, and curator of multisensory experiences. I spent the last 3 years working on Odoropa, a project dedicated to olfactory heritage, which left me forever curious about the sense of smell. It is my pleasure to welcome you as the host of the Internet of Senses podcast for the sense of smell. And today I have Katie Boateng with me. Thank you for being here, Katie.
Yeah, thank
And
you for having me.
so Katie Boateng is an acquired anosmic and has personal experience living with complete smell loss since 2009, so for 14 years. Katie founded the Smell podcast, which she launched in August 2018 to share patient stories, scientific research, and news about the world of smell. Katie has hosted and recorded over 100 interviews with a diverse range of patients and leading researchers and clinicians in the chemosensory sciences. She's a co-founder, board member, and president of the Smell and Taste Association of North America, so that's STANA, and a PCORI Ambassador and a member of the Patient Advocacy Committee of the Global Consortium of Chemosensory Researchers. She also serves as a Fifth Sense Ambassador. Very, very impressive. And I'm also so impressed by 100 interviews on your
Thank you.
podcast. So
Yeah,
congratulations
thank you.
on that. So welcome to the podcast and thank you for being here today again. And before we start, can you just maybe introduce yourself also in maybe a less formal way than I just did?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking there's so many acronyms in there, right?
Yeah.
So my name's Katie Boateng. Actually, you did awesome at pronouncing my last name, so that was awesome. Thank you so much. I live in Cypress, Texas, so it's a suburb of Houston. I've only been here a little bit over a year with my husband and my son. As you mentioned, I'm pretty involved in the chemosensory world. Those of you listening who may not be familiar, chemosensory meaning like smell, taste, chemesthesis, those types of things. And we'll talk about why I'm so invested in this space throughout the podcast. But I am a person who has anosmia due to an upper respiratory infection during my first year of college. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. So then let's jump in. Can you start by explaining your personal journey to a professional and personal life dedicated to chemosensory research? And thank you for defining that also. And of course, the sense of smell in particular.
Absolutely. So I'm definitely not a scientific researcher, but I guess I could consider myself now like a patient researcher and definitely a patient advocate. And I'm deeply invested in providing more research opportunities for people who are affected by smell and taste dysfunction. I mentioned that I became anosmic back in 2009 due to an upper respiratory infection during my first year of college. So I was really ill. And everyone knows that when you're sick, maybe you don't taste your food as well, you don't appreciate it as much, and you're not smelling things as you normally do. But you also know it's going to go away. It's going to come back, right? For me, it never came back. And so that was something that was unexpected, and I didn't know that that could happen to people. It was the spring of 2009, and I had been sick over that winter break between semesters. And I just realized one morning that I didn't have a sense of smell anymore. I had a roommate who was spraying like a cleaning bleach spray, which should smell really strong, while I was having my breakfast cereal. And I was like, hey, don't do that right now. I'm eating. And then the second thought that popped into my head was like, wait a second, I actually don't smell that. And so that's kind of where my journey started as I realized that my sense of smell hadn't come back after I'd been sick. And so I started off by going to the doctor and things like that. But there's just so little research and so few scientific studies that are focused on smell dysfunction and how to fix it. So I've become a person who's dedicated to changing that landscape for everyone who's affected because we deserve better.
And I think you've talked a bit about this in some of your podcasts, but what was the experience like when you found out that you had anosmia or that you thought you had anosmia? What was the response by your doctor when you told them this?
Yeah, great question. So for me, it was really isolating and very lonely. I felt like I was the only person in the world who had this condition. I didn't know the word anosmia for quite a while. I can't remember actually if my doctors mentioned it to me or if I finally figured it out on Google by myself, but I didn't even know that the condition had a name. I was very unprepared looking back for how having long-term smell dysfunction would affect every facet of my life for the rest of my life. When I first became anosmic, I started off by going to my primary care physician, and they couldn't really see that there was like a specific problem that could be causing the loss of the sense of smell. So I was prescribed nasal steroids to see if perhaps I had like some allergies or some inflammation in my nose. The nasal steroids could help. So I did that for, I think, a couple of months, honestly, before I went back. And I reported back to say my sense of smell isn't improving. I still can't smell anything. I was then referred to an ear, nose, and throat specialist or an otolaryngologist. They specialize in your nose, your throat, your ears. And that person was, they were helpful, like explaining that this was like a condition that probably it would come back. I would get my sense of smell back. They did more tests on me. So looking at my nose with like a nasal endoscopy to make sure I didn't have any polyps, anything that could be fixed surgically. And I was prescribed to continue with the nasal steroids because my nose was a little bit inflamed looking. And so they thought, hey, it can't hurt, right? Might as well continue to take these nasal steroids for a little while longer and see if with consistency that will improve, reduce the inflammation and improve your sense of smell. So a couple more months on those, and that did not help. So when I went back to the ear, nose, and throat specialist again, I believe between the ear, nose, and throat and the neurologist who I was referred to next, I was given a CT scan and an MRI, and I don't remember at what point that happened. So I don't know if it was the ENT who did that or if it was the neurologist who did that because I don't have my records anymore. It's been such a long time. But I did get a CT and an MRI. They confirmed that I did have an olfactory bulb. So I did have like the equipment to be able to smell, which is like, of course, I knew that since I grew up with a sense of smell. But they couldn't identify or isolate anything that was causing me to not have one. So that was kind of good news, right? I didn't have a brain tumor. That was excellent, but it still didn't solve the issue of what was going on. So throughout all of that, there was really not any information shared with me about how this would affect me for the rest of my life. My last appointment with a neurologist, I remember checking out with the receptionist as you do when you leave the doctor's office and them saying like, okay, well, you can pay your copay and you don't need to book another appointment. Like insert shoulder shrug emoji, right? Like that was it. There was nothing else about like support or anything offered to me. Just make sure you pay your bill and goodbye.
And do you think that your condition was taken seriously from the beginning, or do you think that when you first proposed this to your doctor that it wasn't taken as seriously as maybe you would think, or if someone came in with, let's say, another condition that they need to do all these tests for? Because I've heard in the past that many people who say think they have anosmia, they also report that people don't understand or their doctors don't take it seriously that they have something wrong with them. So I was curious what your experience was with that.
I don't think it was taken as seriously as it should have been taken. So, to your point, if I showed up at the doctor's office and I reported that I couldn't see, I would be helped in some manner, right? Like I wear glasses. I have an astigmatism, so I need glasses to help my eyes focus. And if I came to the doctor's office and I said, I'm blind, I can't see anything, first of all, I would be tested, which is a big problem with smell dysfunction and taste dysfunction, is we are typically not tested. So at no point during any of that experience with those three separate doctors did I ever receive an objective smell test. And maybe
Wow.
those listening who are like, what is an objective smell test? So my perception, but objective meaning like sniff and sticks or the upsit, which are tests that you're given to say whether or not you can identify a smell or if you can tell the different thresholds between smells. So at no point during any of that did anyone actually test my sense of smell. They just believed me, which is great in theory, right? You want to be believed that you're having an issue. But if, again, back to the analogy, like if I showed up and I didn't have vision, there would be tests that were given to me. I wouldn't be allowed to leave because I couldn't unless someone else was driving me, right? Because you can't see, so you can't operate a vehicle. There's just so many other considerations that would immediately be done for someone if they presented with vision impairment that are not even done or considered at all with anosmia or other like smell and taste dysfunction issues. So absolutely not taken seriously enough at all.
And actually, to even further your point, you said you had things like CT scans taken, which are again visual tests of your body or of your brain, and they're not actually testing your sense of smell, which is where the problem was
Exactly.
originating, I guess. So that's even furthering that point that you had visual tests taken for your olfactory dysfunction. So that's also an issue, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask, did you have a strong interest in smell before you became anosmic, or was your life really shaped after you had this experience of becoming anosmic and then having your podcast dedicated to smell?
Yeah, good question. Absolutely not. I had no interest in my sense of smell. I didn't pay attention to it. I very much took it for granted, as many people do, because it's just something that's there, right? It's just there. You can smell, of course. So not having a sense of smell has absolutely shaped my entire life. But I did not pay attention or focus on it at all.
And so this has really shaped your life and your career as well.
Yeah,
This
so becoming someone without a sense of smell has definitely shaped who I've become and what I've chosen to do for my career. So for a long time when I first became anosmic, it was like too painful for me to like focus on and deal with. So I really didn't, which is you'll think amazing. Like how do you not pay attention to this big loss in your life? But denial is powerful. So for a couple of years, like I just didn't really focus on it. Like I had anxiety, I had depression, but I wasn't like, oh, this is because I don't have a sense of smell. I think I was just like, I just such hard denial about why I was feeling that way. And
Mhm.
so after I honestly 9 years, almost a decade later, in 2018, my husband and I moved from Idaho to New Jersey. I'm originally from Idaho, and we moved there for a job opportunity for my husband. And I didn't have a job for the first time in my like adult career life. And I was looking for jobs in New Jersey and doing a lot of interviews and stuff. But there was like 3 or 4 months where I just had a lot of extra time on my hands and I'm not good at being bored. So I decided for some reason that it was time to explore more of my own anosmia story and like start to unpack that. What I always say is that I put the anosmia in like a little box and then I like wrapped it up really tight with like a really strong bow. And then I like put it on the back of a shelf inside my brain to be taken out at another day when I was like ready to look at it. So when we got to New Jersey and I had time on my hands, I started to like take it down and like unwrap the bow a little bit, like peek inside and see what was going on with it and how I felt about it, which was actually really interesting because I had delayed having a lot of feelings about my anosmia for such a long time, almost a decade, that it was very therapeutic to start the podcast and start exploring what anosmia meant to me and also at the same time to start getting connected with other people who had smell and taste dysfunction and hear from them. So that's part of why I started the podcast is because I really wanted to have a resource for people that would have been vital for me when I first became an anosmic. It was so isolating. I felt like the only human on the earth who had this thing. And so I wanted to make sure that everyone else who was experiencing this knew that it wasn't alone. So I started the podcast, and that led me to being connected with other like patients who have the condition, and then other interested parties like researchers and clinicians. And through all of that and networking with these people, I was able to attend a conference in 2018 hosted by Monell. It was the Identifying Treatments for Taste and Smell Disorders conference and get connected with other patients in person. That was the first time I'd met anyone else in person who had anosmia. And through that conference and through conversations and networking, the idea and the need for a patient advocacy group in the United States was brought forth. And so the idea of the creation of Stana formed. And then over the next couple of years, it was germinating in the background. And we started meeting about Stana in 2020, really similar time frame to when COVID-19 hit, which was just interesting and coincidental timing. Now I'm employed part-time with Stana to lead a PCORI project. And I left my full-time career in higher education back in January 2022 to be able to pursue running a nonprofit. So working with Stana part-time and then volunteering time as well, because I feel like it's so important and valuable. So long story short, all of that to say that becoming an anosmic definitely shaped my life and where I am today, because my career was in higher education admissions. And then I decided like that's not what I wanted to do anymore. And now I'm working in the nonprofit space.
And we'll talk about Stana a bit more later, but if you're comfortable talking about it, we've talked with Rachel Hertz before about how much anosmia can affect your emotions and memory, obviously.
Mhm.
So I was curious if you've noticed any impact in your connection between or your ability to remember things from the past or the present because of your loss of smell, or if it's been more difficult, or if there are any ways that you've been coping with this, because I know it can be a huge emotional impact on your life to lose your sense of smell because it's connected to so many things. So I was wondering if you could speak about this.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a great question. I think that your smell and your emotions and memory are definitely intertwined with each other. For me, I don't like there's no research studies on this as far as I'm aware, but I do think it definitely affects my ability to like form better memories. I do find myself to be more forgetful since I became an anosmic. There's no longer that opportunity to like walk into someone's house and smell like baking ham and be transported back to like a Christmas from when you were a child, right? Or to walk into a movie theater and smell the popcorn, and that would remind you of, like, this movie you went and saw in the summer of 2000. Those things don't happen on a visceral level for me anymore, and so I do think that it affects your ability to form more concrete memory associations. I still form memories, like, I'm not saying I don't, but it's definitely different. So, my memories are tied to, like, sight, maybe temperature, touch, things like that, but no longer triggered by smell.
So you compensate a bit for memories through smell through other senses.
I
That's
think
really
so, whether I
interesting.
meant to or not. I think that you just adapt to your situation, and so you start to associate your memories with other things, but I definitely am more forgetful than I used to be.
That's so interesting. Like that you think you're more forgetful because you lost your sense of smell.
Dr. Hers, if you're listening, we'd love a study on people with long-term anosmia and memory recall. I
Yeah,
think that would be
yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, that would be really fascinating. I mean, I think what we've come to here in just the beginning of our conversation is also just a lack of knowledge that we have in this topic. So that impacts a variety of fields, right? That also impacts me in the field of cultural heritage because many museums are very they lack the knowledge to use smell so that or we have they're afraid of what might happen if a scent is introduced in the museum. So it can also be here, we lack knowledge in the sense of smell in general. So that also impacts people like you, and that's why something like Stana is so amazing, because you're teaching people or offering them the information they need in order to better understand their condition. So yeah, so that's really great. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about your podcast. So can you tell us about the Smell podcast and what its mission is and why you started it?
Yeah, I mentioned it briefly before, but it really exists because it's a resource that I really needed when I first became an OSMIC in 2009, and there was just nothing like that. The goal of the podcast is so that other people who are dealing with smell and taste dysfunction know that they're not alone because it is such an isolating time. And I myself have always been an avid podcast listener. So since the very beginning, I've listened to Stuff You Should Know with Josh and Chuck, and I just listen to other different types of podcasts all the time. And I thought to myself one day during that time I described where I had more time on my hands, like, hey, I really like listening to podcasts. So why not learn how to start one? And I can share more about anosmia and more about other smell and taste dysfunction. And that's where it was really born. So I just Googled, like, how do you start a podcast and figured it out as I went. And as I mentioned before, it's been very therapeutic for me over the years to talk with different people who are affected by these disorders and to learn from them and to empathize with them and to sympathize with them because it's just, it's so important to be able to just connect with someone. None of these people are going to ask me, but can you smell this or can you smell that? None of them are going to ask me that, right? They understand what I'm saying and they don't question it. They remember. So the guests that I speak to, if I ever talk to them later on, they're not going to forget that I have anosmia, right? They're not going to mention smells to me because they're dealing with the same thing. So that's really why the podcast started and why I've been doing it since August 2018 is really because it's just so important to share our stories with each other.
So, do you only have individuals with anosmia on your podcast, or do you have other types of individuals?
Oh, good question. So, no, the majority of the interviews do focus on people with lived experience, but I've also spoken with many like clinicians who work with patients who have smell dysfunction and researchers who are in this space. So, lots of different types of interviews with different interested parties, but mostly the big majority is focused on people who have the lived experience.
So, I've listened to many episodes of your podcast. It's absolutely fascinating, and I learned so much from your podcasts.
Oh,
Um,
good.
so, I was wondering, what sorts of things have you learned from your guests or that have surprised you?
I thought about this one. I think that to me, the biggest thing is I'm always amazed by people's resiliency, right? So we all cope in our different ways. And I love hearing more about how other people are handling their situation. And I'm always really surprised by the amount of hope that remains, especially when there are so few treatment options for the majority of us with like anosmia. People are still hopeful, right? People want to get involved and they want treatment options and they want cures, and they're not giving up, the majority of them. And I just find that inspiring.
I also think it's really interesting some of the individuals with anosmia who come on your podcast because there's such a variety of things that can happen. And so you also learn about these people from such an empathetic place because you can really understand them. I think that's really great. But also you learn, like, I didn't know a lot of the genetic disorders that you can
Mm,
have that lead to anosmia. So
yes,
that
like
means like
common
so,
syndrome.
I mean, these are rare disorders, but it also means that there's a lot of people out there with anosmia that we may not know about, and they might not even know that they have anosmia, and the doctors haven't talked about it with them.
What you might be referencing is a lot of the folks who come on who have congenital anosmia. So
Yeah,
they were born
congenital.
without a sense of smell. And a lot of the times it's due to like genetic condition, or maybe they were born without an olfactory bulb. But it does take them quite a long time to figure out that they don't have a sense of smell, which you would think again, like, why wouldn't you know that? Or like, why wouldn't their parents know that? But it's really easy because we don't focus on smell, right? Many of the people that I've interviewed who have congenital anosmia, they don't figure it out until like grade school, middle school, because they think that it's something like puberty. I'm going to get my sense of smell when I have puberty, right? Or it's like a muscle that I don't have yet, but as I get bigger, it's going to grow and then I'll be able to use it. And so it takes a long time because the child doesn't have the capacity to explain I don't have a sense of smell. I mean, they do, but like I think it's an abstract concept. There's all these people around me who are talking about this thing, but I don't have it. So maybe I just won't talk about it, or maybe I'll say something to my parents, but it's so abstract to them that they're not even going to pay attention to what I'm saying because how could that even be? How is it possible that you wouldn't have a sense of smell? Like, we're not going to all right, fine. Like some people I've talked to, yeah, their parents did take it seriously and they sought out help pretty early, but the majority of them didn't until they were older, like middle school.
And I guess that goes back to testing as well, because I know I have really bad eyesight. And my mom figured that out because my school did an eye exam, and told
Exactly.
her that I had bad eyesight. And I remember also having hearing tests in elementary school. So that's another way testing could inform these kinds of disorders or situations.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I know that you also on your podcast, but also I've seen some YouTube videos. You've talked about some daily tips or some ways in which you have worked with the condition of having anosmia and how you've coped. So could you share some of these tips with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, now that I'm so long in, I don't focus on it as much now as I did at the beginning, even though it's my career path now. But like I do focus on it, but it's not like my primary focus, if that makes sense. But I have found in general, like doing yoga, journaling, going on walks, that these things are helpful for me in managing my mental health in all areas of my life, but they definitely help, like when you're living with anosmia. I'm a big proponent of therapy. I go to therapy regularly. I think it's awesome. You get to go and talk to someone about your life and complain about anything you want, and they have to listen to you. So it's like perfect. So I definitely recommend that to anyone, but specifically if you're dealing with smell dysfunction, that you have a space, a safe space where you can go and talk about it. Over the years as well, I've also come to terms with the fact that anosmia is such a huge loss in my life. So I view it as that and I accept it as such. So what I mean by that is if you're familiar with like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, she talks about denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I think that smell loss or smell dysfunction that doesn't resolve over time is a loss. And so for me, I've come to recognize that it's like very cyclical and it's okay to go through the different stages of grief about it. Most of the time I live in acceptance and I'm relatively okay. But sometimes I'm still like really angry or I'll get really sad and really depressed about it. And that's okay. I'm still dealing with this 14 years in. And I know that however I'm feeling, it's going to be cyclical and it's going to move in and out of these different stages for me. So it's not like oh, I lost my sense of smell. Now I'm sad about it. And now I'm okay for the rest of my life and I'm done with that. That's not how grief works, right? It's very back and forth, up and down. So I am allowed to be sad about it. I am allowed to be like pissed off about it. I'm allowed to feel however I feel. And like accepting that has been so helpful for me because there is no like, you should just be okay and happy and like move on. That's not how life works. And so I think that I would offer that as a coping skill to anyone who's listening or who's dealing with these issues. It's okay to have emotions about your loss because it is a big loss. It's normal.
Yeah, I've never thought about it that way, but that's really great way how you put it, that it's that you're grieving the loss of your sense of smell, and that's a way of perceiving that loss. And have you talked to other people who are anosmic about this way that you look at the loss of your anosmia, or like does that also resonate with others, or is this kind of your own perspective?
I mean, it took me a long time to get there, right? Because I was like, why am I still sad about this? Like, why am I still upset? It's been so long. Like, I should just be fine, right? And then my other good piece of advice is stop shoulding all over yourself. I don't know who told me that, maybe a therapist, but like, you shouldn't should yourself, right? You don't have to feel anyway. You shouldn't feel a certain this way or that. So, I have spoken to a couple of guests about this concept. And actually, my mom, she's a mental health counselor. And so she came on the podcast and we had a conversation about this exact topic. And so it was really great to like speak with her and like dive into this concept with her a little bit further. But definitely I feel like there are other people in the anosmia community who resonate with this because it's not just something that you get over, right? And maybe you do. Like maybe someone is at that point where they're just like absolutely happy living in acceptance and that's where they hang out and that's where they stay. And that's wonderful, but I think it's okay to go back and forth through the stages.
And I guess this would be different for someone who had congenital anosmia, who lost it from the beginning of their life, than for someone like you who has actually lost it,
I
right?
mean, typically when I speak with people who have congenital anosmia, they definitely have a different lived experience, right? Because it's not something that they had and then they lost. It's something that they grew up with not having. But I do think it's absolutely okay if they have different feelings about this, feeling angry that they didn't have a sense of smell, or feeling depressed about it, or just wanting it to be different. Like that's also a valid way to feel because they were denied something that other people have. So they may be experiencing it as its own type of loss, even though they didn't have it in the beginning.
Yeah. Wow. This is a really interesting conversation, but I also want to give you the opportunity to talk about Stana, which you already kind of mentioned. But can you explain again, or maybe in a little bit more detail, about Stana and what it is, what it does, and what their mission is?
Absolutely. So, STANA, or the Smell and Taste Association of North America, is a patient advocacy group focused on improving the lives of people who have smell and taste dysfunction. So, our vision is a world where smell and taste are valued as essential to our health, safety, and wellness, because as we've discussed in this conversation, they're not typically valued as essential to health, safety, and wellness. So, we really want to change that so that people appreciate the sense of smell and understand how important it is in our daily lives.
Also, beyond that, yeah, you're creating like a community through this, but also developing tools, right, to provide people to use when they do have olfactory dysfunction, because it's not only anosmia, but also a broader scope of chemosensory dysfunction, right?
Yeah, so that's our vision is, right, a world where smell and taste are valued as essential to health, safety, and wellness. But we have a very broad mission statement where we seek to do many different things. So serving as a voice for people who have smell and taste disorders through education and public awareness. We collaborate with people who live with these disorders with other interested parties like healthcare professionals and institutions so that we can provide evidence-based education, resources, and networking opportunities. We talked about the importance of networking. We also advocate for funding and expansion of research on smell and taste disorders, sharing the patient's lived experience with all different kinds of stakeholders so they begin to understand how important it is. We want to promote effective and accessible diagnostic and treatment options. And then finally, partnering with organizations around the world who are aligned with our vision so that we can broaden our outreach because there are other patient advocacy groups around the world who have similar missions.
Who are some of the stakeholder communities that you reach?
So, working with like other researchers from research institutes or different universities around the country, getting connected with clinicians. One of the things that we really want to do is get connected with primary care physicians and like nurse practitioners, people outside the normal box of what you would think for a clinician, right? So, not just ENTs. Typically, when you have smell dysfunction, the first person you go to is your primary care physician. And that could be whether it's like a medical doctor or a nurse practitioner. That's usually the first person who sees these people. So we'd love to work more closely with these groups of clinicians so that we can really like spread awareness of how impactful these disorders are so that they know and they are armed with tools that they can have available to them to help these patients when they come across them in their office.
What are some of the ways that these types of practitioners could improve when approaching a situation of someone with olfactory or chemosensory dysfunction?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Maybe that's a really hard question, but
No, it's okay. I think right now there's just like really a lack of awareness of how this affects people. And so like a critical piece to improving this relationship between clinicians and patients would be like clinician awareness and education about how much this does affect your life. Right? My nutrition is affected, my mental health is affected, my safety is a concern. I have a gas stove in my home. That's a huge problem. I mean, I manage that, but that's an issue. I could potentially leave that on and like blow up my house. Like these are things that clinicians should be aware of. And it's difficult because a clinician wants to treat you. They want to provide you with a treatment. They want to say, go do this, and this will help you get treated and fixed. That doesn't currently exist for the majority of smell issues, right? Some smell can, like some people who have smell dysfunction, there's something that can be treated, which is awesome. A lot of people, like myself, who have long term smell dysfunction, just have it. And there's currently not anything that you can do or provide for me medically that's going to fix my sense of smell right now. However, if you were to have a conversation with me as my physician and say, I can't fix this for you, but you should be aware of how this is going to affect your mental health. Let's get you connected with some resources. You should be aware of some safety concerns, especially around like gas stoves, smoke, fire. You should be aware of food safety and cooking, making sure you're not eating spoiled foods. You should be aware of how this is going to affect your nutrition, right? You're going to gravitate towards certain foods now because your eating experience is different. Let's make sure you're aware of that, and let's make a plan to get you connected with a dietitian or with some resources so that you can be aware you want to eat McDonald's every day. I want to eat McDonald's every day with anosmia because it's high fat, high carbs. It's more satiating. I can't eat McDonald's every day. I mean, I could, but I shouldn't, right? For my health. So let's have that conversation as a physician with your patient about all these other areas that they could provide you with resources. And that would make such a difference. I can't treat you, but I can still help you with these different things. That experience would have been amazing to me back in 2009 when it was just like, pay your copay, don't book another appointment. If someone had mentioned any of those things to me, that would have been more comforting than what I experienced.
That was a fantastic answer.
Thanks.
These are all things that I haven't thought about. So, of course, because I don't have anosmia, so it's great to also hear your perspective on it. And also, we don't think about how much losing our sense of smell could impact our nutrition.
Right.
So, that's also interesting what you say about McDonald's.
Oh, yeah. I
I
gained,
never
I
heard that.
think, between like 15 to 20 pounds in 2009 because all I would do is go eat Big Macs and French fries and soda because I can't perceive flavors. Since I have no sense of smell, I have no flavor perception. So the nuances of food are lost on me. And an example of what I'm talking about is like yogurt. I know it's cold, I know it's creamy, I know it's sweet. I could not tell you whether I was eating strawberry, blueberry, mango yogurt. No idea if I wasn't looking at it or if there wasn't like fruit chunks in it. Absolutely no idea. I just know it's cold and creamy, right? And so my experience when I first became anosmic is just eating high fat, high carb food because I was chasing that sensation of like satiety, like feeling full and feeling satisfied by my food, and it wasn't there anymore. And so I gained a lot of weight and I was able to like lose that over time, but some people have the opposite reaction and they just quit eating and they lose a lot of weight. And so there
Yeah.
should be conversations about that too. I know you don't want to eat, but like let's make a plan for your nutrition.
Because you have such a personal connection to this project, obviously. So, how do you take your personal experience and then fuel it into outcomes for the project or into processes that others can use or implement into their own practice, or like you mentioned for the practitioners? How do you then fuel that through Stana and make it an outcome?
Right. I think you have conversations with these groups of people. You find different like champions within that community that can go forth and spread your message of what you're trying to do and why it's important and make more opportunities for Stana to like network with these clinicians themselves, but also like clinician organizations, right? An amazing goal would be to have like curriculum changes. Let's talk
Mhm.
about smell and taste dysfunction in the actual curriculum for a primary care provider. That way they know what to do when they come across a patient. Because right now, I think it's probably like a footnote in one chapter of one textbook during medical school, right? So we're competing with all the other really, really important information that these providers need to know. But I think by moving forward and having conversations with clinician organizations and clinicians themselves, we can start to change this so that people are more aware of what to do when they come across patients like me and patients who have maybe like parosmia or they are born without a sense of smell. We're all very different from each other.
Yeah, and that would improve this lack of awareness overall. If we could somehow inform from the beginning, then we all would have that information and then there wouldn't be a lack anymore.
And one thing that we currently don't do that is desperately needed is test. We don't test for smell and taste dysfunction, right? So you talked about it earlier. Do you remember when you were young and you'd get a yearly eye exam at school or at your doctor's office? When my son was born in 2021, and within 24 hours of birth, someone wheeled in a cart to do a hearing test on him. Nothing like that happens for smell or taste. We don't value it, so we don't test it. And I think we don't test it because we don't know what to do with it. right? So,
Yeah.
okay, all these people have smell dysfunction. Now what? Right?
Yeah.
Because there's not really a lot of treatment options. And so it's kind of a catch-22. We need to test people so that we can understand how many people are affected, and we can use that information to then advocate for, look at how many people are affected. We need more treatment options, right? That's where we
Yeah.
need to get in the future.
So before we conclude the podcast with our last question, is there anything else you want to add about Stana or about maybe something that's coming up or your next what you're working on next within the
Yeah, so one thing that I can make a pitch for if people are interested is we do have a change.org petition where you can go sign to advocate for universal screening for smell and taste. Again, we're hoping to raise awareness and to make this a standard practice when you go to your doctor's office that you would be tested for your sense of smell. This isn't just for people like me who have anosmia due to like a sickness or maybe a head injury or those who have congenital anosmia. People lose their sense of smell diminishes as they age, right? And so all of the same issues that I described that affect my life, nutrition, safety, mental health, that applies to older adults who are dealing with hyposmia, which is a reduced sense of smell, or anosmia. So to say that it doesn't matter or that it doesn't affect that many people is just untrue. We really need universal screening because everyone ages, everyone gets older. And so we should start having these conversations and be aware that for our older adults, they're going to be dealing with these same issues too. So I would advocate, if you're interested, to check out that change.org petition, and I can share that with you.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
notes.
we'll add it to the podcast information.
Perfect.
Okay, so to conclude, how do you hope organizations like Stana will make a difference for the future? Or perhaps you have some sort of wish that you hope for the future of smell, but also for patients with anosmia.
Yeah, I hope in the future that Stana continues to make a difference in advocating for the importance of smell and taste in our lives so that people can understand how important it is and we can continue to get more research done for these areas, which will hopefully lead to more treatment options for people. It shouldn't be a situation where you go to the doctor, you have no sense of smell, and then you're just left to your own devices for the rest of your life, right? We should get to a point, and we will get to a point where if you go to the doctor and you say, something's wrong with my sense of smell, you're treated just like you would be if you had a hearing issue or a vision issue. You're tested, you're taken seriously, and you're provided treatment options.
Especially since losing your sense of smell can be so isolating. So, as I think many people also experienced when that happened to them during COVID. So, yeah. Okay, well, that's the end of our podcast. So thank you so much again for spending time with me today, and it was really interesting talking to you. And I really hope that everyone goes who's ever listening to this podcast will go and listen to your podcast because they're so great and I learned so much from them. We'll link your podcast as well in the information.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me today. Thank you for offering the opportunity to talk about Stana, and I hope everyone can check us out and get involved.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.